Psalm 44. God goes before you. Every dark power behind you is broken. Now there are moments in life when we look around and see only darkness pressing against us. It feels as though every step forward is resisted by unseen forces, every prayer delayed by invisible walls, and every hope challenged by fear. Yet Psalm 44 reminds us that we are never left to face the battle alone. God goes before us. His presence does not merely accompany us. It leads us, shields us, and dismantles what stands in our path. This psalm is not a mere recollection of Israel's past victories, but a declaration of divine intervention in every generation. It is the assurance that the same God who fought for his people before still walks before us now. To understand the profound message of Psalm 44, we must move beyond the surface of the verses and see the deeper spiritual reality within them. When God goes before you, every dark power that once sought to destroy you is rendered powerless. This psalm teaches us that divine leadership precedes divine victory. You are not alone in this battle. God himself has stepped into the path ahead, turning what could have destroyed you into what will define you. This is a song of remembrance and reassurance, a cry from the soul that has felt defeat, yet refuses to doubt the commander who fights on its behalf. When darkness surrounds you, when enemies mock your faith, when life feels heavy and confusing, remember this: God goes before you, and because he does, every dark power behind you is broken now. Let us dive into the heart of Psalm 44 and uncover what it truly means to walk with a God who fights for you before you even realize the battle has begun. God goes before you, the path of divine leadership. When Scripture says, God goes before you, it reveals a dimension of divine involvement that is far greater than protection alone. It speaks of a God who walks ahead of his people, preparing the road they will walk upon, removing traps before they appear, and disarming enemies before they strike. In Deuteronomy 31:8, it is written, "The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you." The truth hidden in this promise is that divine presence is not static. It moves, it acts, it leads. Psalm 44 begins with remembrance. We have heard with our ears, O God. Our fathers have told us what work you did in their days, in the times of old. This verse is more than historical reflection. It is a testimony to divine leadership. Israel's victories were never born of human strategy. The walls of Jericho did not fall by military power, and the Red Sea did not part because of human wisdom. These were outcomes of a God who had already gone before his people, establishing victory long before the battle began. Every believer must grasp this principle. When God leads, darkness loses its authority. The powers that once pursued you, fear, shame, guilt, rejection, confusion, are all broken when God goes before you. He does not simply clear the path, he transforms it. What was once a battlefield becomes a testimony ground. What was once a valley of despair becomes a passage of revelation. There are seasons in your life when it feels as though you are walking through confusion, not knowing which direction to take. But even in silence, God is still leading. Divine leadership is not always visible. Sometimes it is a whisper, sometimes a delay, sometimes the closing of one door so that another may open. To the human eye, it may seem as though God is distant, but in truth, he is several steps ahead, orchestrating deliverance before you even know you need it. When Israel wandered through the wilderness, they followed a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. Those symbols were more than divine signs. They were visual representations of God's forward movement. The cloud went before them, the fire went before them. Their duty was not to understand the route, but to trust the one leading them. In the same way, God still leads his people today, not always with visible signs, but always with unbreakable purpose. To say God goes before me is to declare trust in the unseen orchestration of heaven. It is to believe that before you wake, God has already walked through your day. Before you face that meeting, that challenge, that heartbreak, or that unseen spiritual attack, he has already been there. The path of divine leadership is not always smooth, but it is always sovereign. The greatest mistake we make in our walk of faith is assuming that divine leadership means absence of conflict. But the truth is, when God goes before you, he does not eliminate all enemies. He conquers them. Sometimes he allows the battle so that you may witness his power. Sometimes he allows opposition so that your faith may mature. God's leadership is not meant to make you comfortable. It is meant to make you confident in him. When the Israelites faced the Red Sea, it was not because God had lost control. It was because he wanted them to see what happens when he leads. They saw the sea split and their enemies drowned. When God goes before you, he does not only lead you into deliverance. He uses your very obstacles to display his glory. The same pattern continues in our lives today. When you face opposition, you must remember that you are not walking first. God is. That betrayal you didn't expect, that storm you didn't see coming, that door that suddenly closed, all were seen by God long before they reached you. The very forces that tried to chase you will collapse under the weight of divine authority. But to experience this truth, you must learn to let God lead. Divine leadership requires surrender. The reason many remain trapped in cycles of fear and defeat is because they try to walk ahead of God. They fight battles he never asked them to fight. They carry burdens he already bore, and they chase paths he never designed. To walk in divine order is to move only when God moves, and to stop when he stops. When Psalm 44:3 says, "For they got not the land in possession by their own sword, neither did their own arm save them, but your right hand and your arm and the light of your countenance, because you had favor unto them." It reveals the secret of all victory. God's leadership flows from his favor. When he goes before you, it is not merely because you are faithful, it is because you are favored. Favor is the atmosphere of divine advancement. It means God has already spoken good things about you in heavenly places. It means your name is already known in the courts of divine strategy. The dark powers behind you cannot undo what has been decreed before you. Every believer must come to understand this. Dark powers cannot follow where God has already gone ahead. When he walks before you, he creates a divine barrier, a wall of light that darkness cannot penetrate. You do not need to fear what chases you when you are walking behind the one who commands all creation. So, the next time you face uncertainty, whisper to your soul, "God goes before me." The next time you feel surrounded by opposition, remind yourself, every dark power behind me is broken. When you walk in alignment with divine leadership, you are not just moving through life, you are moving through a preordained path of victory. Therefore, trust his leading even when it is silent. Follow his direction even when it is unclear. And when you cannot see the way, rest in the assurance that the way has already been walked by the one who calls you his own. God goes before you, not behind, not beside, but before. That means every step you take is on ground already conquered by grace. If this message speaks to your heart, remember to subscribe to the channel so you can continue walking deeper into the Word and understanding how God's presence prepares the way for your victory. The hidden battle. God's presence shatters what you cannot see. There are moments in every believer's journey when life feels like a mystery of struggle. You sense resistance without explanation. You wake with heaviness but cannot identify its source. You walk into a room and feel unseen tension pressing on your spirit. You pray, and it feels as though your words are moving through thick fog. What is this invisible pressure that surrounds the soul of one walking with God? It is not merely emotional fatigue, it is the echo of a hidden war. Psalm 44 gives language to that invisible struggle. The people of God cry out not because of visible armies alone, but because of the unseen forces that have surrounded their destiny. They say, "Thou makest us to turn back from the enemy, and they which hate us spoil for themselves." Yet beneath that cry lies a deeper reality. While they perceive defeat, God is already working in a dimension they cannot see. Every dark power that rises against the chosen of God does not begin its assault in the natural realm. It begins in the unseen. That is why Ephesians 6 reminds us we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world. To walk with God is to live aware that your battles are not primarily physical, but spiritual. The opposition that meets you at work, the sudden conflict in your relationships, the fear that paralyzes you at night, the delay that keeps repeating in your journey. These are not random. They are often reflections of an invisible conflict attempting to disrupt what heaven has decreed over your life. But here is the truth that Psalm 44 proclaims with power. God goes before you into that invisible war. He does not wait until the darkness manifests. He engages it at its root. The battle you feel but cannot see has already been addressed by the one who stands outside of time. Before you wake, before the attack begins, before the enemy forms his plan, God has already moved. When the psalmist says, "Through thee will we push down our enemies, through thy name will we tread them under that rise up against us," it is not a call to human strength, but an acknowledgement that God's presence becomes the weapon. God's presence is not passive energy, it is an active, consuming fire that breaks demonic coordination and dismantles spiritual ambushes. You may not see it, but when you pray, light travels before you. When you trust, the word you declare becomes a sword that cuts through the unseen resistance. When you worship even in sorrow, heaven deploys strength in dimensions your natural senses cannot perceive. The greatest victories of your life are not the ones you watch unfold with your eyes. They are the ones fought in silence when you simply decided not to give up, not to lose faith, and not to curse God in the waiting. The hidden battle is often misunderstood because the human heart associates God's presence with constant peace. Yet the reality of the spiritual journey is that God's presence often provokes warfare, not because you are forsaken, but because his presence exposes darkness. The moment light enters a space, shadows react. That is why when you begin to grow spiritually, when you start praying more fervently, when you break cycles of sin, when you commit to walking in purity and obedience, you suddenly feel increased opposition. You must never mistake that resistance for absence of God. It is, in fact, evidence that he has gone before you. The increase of warfare is often the proof that light has entered territory once ruled by darkness. In Psalm 44, the people of God struggle to understand why they are facing defeat despite their loyalty. All this is come upon us. Yet have we not forgotten thee, neither have we dealt falsely in thy covenant. They are confused, wondering why God seems distant. Yet, beneath that lament is the profound revelation that even faithful hearts encounter darkness, not because God has abandoned them, but because he is teaching them to trust his unseen movement. There are seasons when God fights battles in silence. You will not feel his hand, you will not hear his voice, and yet he is dismantling powers that sought to rise behind you. Sometimes the silence of God is not neglect, it is strategy. When God hides, he is not retreating, he is surrounding. When he seems still, he is encircling what oppresses you. The psalmist cries, "Awake, why sleepest thou, O Lord? Arise, cast us not off forever." It sounds like a desperate plea, but it is in this cry that faith is refined. God does not sleep, but he allows his people to perceive silence so that their trust might deepen beyond emotions. When you stop depending on the visible signs of his activity, you start walking in true faith. You see, every hidden battle begins in the unseen realm, but victory is also secured there. The same unseen world that hosts darkness also hosts the armies of light. For every demonic whisper that tries to discourage you, there are angelic declarations being spoken over your destiny. For every curse plotted against your progress, there are heavenly decrees of blessing breaking through. For every trap the enemy sets, there is a divine redirection crafted by God's foresight. You do not fight alone. You move within an atmosphere of divine orchestration. The hidden battle often intensifies when you are closest to breakthrough. This is why many believers give up right before the manifestation of victory. The pressure becomes unbearable, the confusion deepens, and your strength feels depleted. But this is the point where you must stand firm and remember that the power behind you has already been broken. The enemy's last effort is always loudest before he loses his ground. The night is darkest before dawn, and spiritual resistance often peaks right before divine revelation. When Israel marched around Jericho, the walls did not fall after the first day, nor the second, nor the third. They fell on the seventh day, after consistent obedience, after repetitive motion that made no logical sense. Faith in the unseen must be sustained by trust in God's leadership. The soldiers of Israel could not see what was happening inside the walls, but heaven was shaking foundations beneath their feet. In the same way, when you continue to pray, to worship, to walk uprightly, even when nothing appears to change, God is collapsing the structures of opposition you cannot yet see. You must learn to interpret silence differently. The absence of visible movement does not equal the absence of divine power. When nothing seems to move, everything in heaven is aligning. God fights differently than man. Man confronts what he sees. God dismantles what he knows. He does not need to shout to win a war. Sometimes his whisper in your spirit is enough to destroy the schemes of darkness. The hidden battle is not fought with physical weapons, but with endurance of faith. That is why Paul said, having done all, to stand. To stand is to declare that you will not surrender to fear. To stand is to proclaim that your trust in God will not be moved by what your eyes do not see. To stand is to realize that your position of faith itself is warfare. Every time you choose not to respond in anger, every time you forgive when wronged, every time you keep believing despite disappointment, you are striking the enemy with the weapon of steadfast faith. When Psalm 44 proclaims that God goes before his people, it does not promise a life free of opposition. It promises that opposition cannot triumph. When God's presence leads, he not only clears the path ahead, he also disrupts every dark power attempting to chase you from behind. This dual movement, forward guidance and backward defense, is what makes divine leadership unstoppable. God does not just open doors before you. He closes doors behind you that could lead you back into bondage. That is why sometimes God separates you from people, places, or situations that you do not understand. It is not rejection, it is protection. He is sealing what he has delivered you from, so that you cannot return to the same patterns that once enslaved you. There are dark powers that attach themselves to memory. The enemy tries to use your past as a weapon against your present. He reminds you of your failures, your sins, your missed opportunities, your mistakes, and your wounds, hoping that you will re-enter emotional bondage. But when God goes before you, he does not only fight external enemies, he breaks internal chains. Every dark power behind you includes the invisible influence of shame, fear, bitterness, and guilt. These are the unseen forces that tie people to cycles. Yet in the presence of God, even those invisible cords are severed. Do not underestimate the power of your past trying to follow you. The enemy does not always attack with new weapons. He often attacks with old memories. That is why God's leadership includes deliverance from remembrance. He does not only redeem you from sin, he rewires the narrative of your past so that it no longer controls your identity. When you walk in his leading, you carry new DNA. Your past can no longer find you in the spiritual realm. Darkness seeks what no longer exists, for the person you once were has been hidden in Christ. Psalm 44 teaches us that the presence of God not only protects but transforms perception. The people begin by recalling God's mighty works in history, but as they progress through their pain, they are brought to a revelation that even in perceived defeat, God is still victorious. You see, faith must learn to declare victory even when surrounded by loss. The hidden battle is not won when circumstances change. It is won when your heart refuses to doubt. God's greatest triumphs often begin in hearts that simply decide to believe him again. When you understand that God goes before you, you begin to rest, even while the battle continues. Peace becomes your position. The chaos may roar, the darkness may whisper, but your spirit remains anchored. You do not need to know how he will do it, you just know he already has. This is the rest of divine confidence. The storms that terrified you before now become backdrops for God's glory. You stop striving to control outcomes and start trusting the one who already wrote them. Many believers want to see before they believe, but those who walk with God must learn to believe before they see. The hidden battle is designed to purify your vision. God wants you to trust him when there is no evidence of deliverance. He wants your faith to mature from dependency on miracles to dependence on his nature. When you reach that point, you no longer panic in the dark, for you know that light always moves ahead of you. The greatest assurance you can hold onto in this life is that God's presence does not only walk beside you, it invades every direction. He goes before you to prepare the way, and he stands behind you to protect what has been accomplished. When he moves, he leaves no vulnerable space. The dark powers that pursued your ancestors cannot overtake you because the blood of Jesus now marks your path. The curses that traveled through generations are broken because divine light walks before your lineage. Every hidden snare, every spoken curse, every invisible chain, all lose their strength the moment you step into alignment with his presence. And this is why prayer matters. Prayer is not begging God to come, it is aligning yourself with the God who already went. When you pray, you are not inviting him to move. You are stepping into movement that already began. The moment you lift your voice, you join the rhythm of divine warfare already being fought on your behalf. You do not fight for victory, you fight from victory. That is why the psalmist declares, "Through thy name we will tread down our enemies." The battle is not won by your ability but by your alignment. There will come a day when you look back and realize how many dangers God shielded you from that you never saw. The accident that did not happen, the betrayal that was exposed, the attack that was silently dismantled. These are testimonies of a God who fought unseen battles for you. You are alive not because you were careful, but because he was covering you. You did not survive by luck, but by leadership. Divine foresight has been operating in your life since the moment you surrendered. So now, do not fear the unknown. The unknown is simply the territory God has already surveyed. Do not tremble before invisible opposition, for God has already confronted it. You may not know what tomorrow brings, but you can rest knowing that he has already walked through it. The unseen realm is where he establishes your victory. Psalm 44 ends with a cry for redemption. Arise for our help and redeem us for thy mercy's sake. Yet that cry is already answered through Christ. The cross is the ultimate declaration that every dark power behind you is broken. The blood of Jesus does not only cover sin, it breaks patterns, dismantles principalities, and seals eternal victory. That means the powers that once had legal right to pursue you have been stripped of authority. You walk now in grace that goes before you and glory that surrounds you. So stand firm in this truth. You are never alone in battle. The unseen hand of God moves before you, around you, and within you. Every unseen force that once chased your destiny has been silenced. Every demonic voice that tried to accuse you has been overruled. Every curse that tried to linger in your shadow has been broken by divine decree. You are walking on ground already claimed by heaven. And now, as you continue your journey, remember this. Faith does not demand understanding. It demands trust. The more you trust, the more His presence manifests. The more you rest, the more His light expands before you. Your greatest weapon in unseen warfare is unwavering confidence that God goes before you. So lift your head, steady your heart, and walk forward knowing that before every battle formed against you, God already declared victory. You may not see the angels surrounding you, but they are there. You may not hear the voice of God speaking into the unseen, but He is commanding peace into your storm. Every dark power that once followed you now trembles at the sound of your name, because your name is covered in His. Walk boldly, speak life, pray with certainty, worship with conviction. And above all, remember, God goes before you, and because He does, every dark power behind you is broken now. If this message strengthens your faith, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next revelation that deepens your walk with God and prepares you for the unseen victories ahead. The Valley of Delay. When God's timing becomes the weapon, every believer eventually walks through a valley that cannot be escaped through speed or strategy. It is the valley of divine delay, the space between promise and fulfillment, between prayer and manifestation, between hope and evidence. Psalm 44 captures this human tension with haunting honesty. The people of God cry, "Thou hast sore broken us in the place of dragons and covered us with the shadow of death." They are not describing ordinary defeat. They are describing a season where victory seems postponed, where faith must breathe in darkness. Yet even here, God goes before them. Delay is not denial. It is the shadow cast by God's movement ahead of you. When heaven is rearranging the battlefield, time itself bends to divine purpose. You see, when God walks before you, He not only removes the enemy's traps, He also adjusts the clock of destiny. His timing is the unseen weapon that disarms the wicked. The enemy moves with impatience. God moves with precision. To those who trust Him, what feels like stagnation is often strategic silence. Every waiting season is an act of spiritual warfare. Each day you refuse to give up becomes a declaration that your faith is not ruled by the clock, but by the covenant. Delay exposes what quick victory would hide. It strips you of false confidence, reveals the motives of those around you, and tests the authenticity of your worship. Israel learned this painfully. When they fought without divine command, they lost. But when they waited for God to go before them, they triumphed effortlessly. Psalm 44 recalls their fathers' victories because those victories came from timing, not talent. They got not the land in possession by their own sword. The delay between marching orders and conquest was sacred space where God dismantled invisible resistance. In your life, the same mystery unfolds. You pray for breakthrough, and heaven answers with stillness. You expect rapid success, and God grants process instead. You ask for the door to open, but He reinforces the walls. To the impatient heart, this feels like abandonment. Yet to the discerning spirit, it is proof that the battle is being fought in realms beyond sight. God's delays are not empty. They are packed with unseen movement. While you wait, He is speaking to hearts, shifting circumstances, convicting enemies and securing favor. He delays because He loves too deeply to deliver you into half-prepared victory. The Valley of Delay exposes two truths at once: the weakness of human control and the strength of divine orchestration. We live in an age that worships speed. People measure blessing by immediacy. But divine processes move at the rhythm of eternity, not the tempo of desire. When God goes before you, he carries eternity into time, and therefore his steps cannot be rushed. He walks through every detail of the path, touching moments you have not yet lived, repairing breaches you do not yet know exist. You are frustrated by slowness, but he is ensuring permanence. If God moved according to your deadlines, you would inherit blessings too fragile to endure pressure. The Israelites could not enter the promised land until the inhabitants' iniquity had reached its fullness. That delay was moral strategy. If they had entered earlier, justice would have been incomplete. In the same way, God times your breakthroughs not only for your sake, but for the sake of his righteousness. He ensures that when victory comes, it does not merely elevate you, it vindicates his character. Delay also exposes darkness that would have followed you. Remember, every dark power behind you must be broken before you move forward. When you think God is withholding promotion, he might actually be destroying a pattern. You want acceleration, but he wants cleansing. You long to cross the sea, but he must drown Pharaoh first. To rush ahead of divine timing is to carry surviving enemies into your next season. The valley of waiting is where God finishes old wars so that new victories can begin undefiled. In the stillness of delay, your prayers mature. At first you pray for relief, then for understanding, and finally for alignment. This transformation of prayer is itself victory. God values the shaping of your heart more than the shortening of your weight. Every sigh in the dark becomes incense before his throne. Every tear you release becomes prophecy that light is near. Faith, refined by delay, carries authority that instant miracles cannot give. Look carefully at Psalm 44. The people remember ancient victories, lament present suffering, yet still end with, "Redeem us for thy mercy's sake." They refuse to abandon covenant language. They understand that though time has slowed, mercy has not ceased. That is the lesson of every divine delay. God's mercy travels faster than your impatience. His compassion keeps you alive, while his wisdom prepares the outcome. You think you are waiting for God, but often he is waiting for the right hour when his glory will be undeniable. Imagine the forge where a sword is shaped. The metal must endure heat and hammering before it gleams. If removed too soon, it remains brittle. The same principle governs your faith. Delay is the furnace where your conviction is tempered. When you finally emerge, you do not merely hold testimony, you become testimony. People who have never waited will admire your results, but will not understand your strength. That is because divine delay births authority. You cannot command storms if you have never endured silence. There is also protection in postponement. Many times God withholds progress to shield you from hidden traps. He sees conversations you are not part of, plans you are unaware of, motives masked as friendship. If he allowed the door to open prematurely, those traps would greet you on the other side. So he delays. The delay is love, disguised as distance. When the time is right, he will not only open the door, he will escort you through it with peace. Patience, therefore, is warfare. It irritates hell because it mirrors heaven's calm. Satan thrives on reaction, he loses to endurance. When you keep walking without panic, you testify that God's leadership is enough. Every day of trust in the valley adds pressure to the enemy's confusion. He cannot understand why you still praise when nothing changes, why you still pray when you feel unheard, why you still give thanks while surrounded by lack. Your persistence becomes a prophetic declaration that delay is not defeat. And this is the secret. While you think you are standing still, heaven is advancing. God's timing marches before you like an invisible army. Each tick of his divine clock dismantles demonic coordination. Forces that once conspired against you grow weary as his timing stretches their plans thin. What was designed to overwhelm you ends up expiring. By the time God calls you forward, The landscape of opposition has changed. They waited for your destruction, but you arrive at your destiny to find no enemy standing. Consider Joseph. His dreams placed him ahead of his brothers in the spirit, but time placed him beneath them in reality. Thrown into a pit, sold as a slave, imprisoned unjustly. Each delay looked like regression. Yet every delay was transportation toward fulfillment. Had he been freed earlier, Egypt's famine would not yet exist, and his purpose would lack context. God's timing does not only bless you, it synchronizes your gift with the world's need. The waiting you despise is often alignment with global destiny. In Psalm 44, the people recall the miraculous inheritance of their fathers and ask why the same power seems absent. The truth is, the same power was present. It was simply moving beneath the surface. God often hides his strongest activity beneath ordinary days. While Israel lamented, God was preparing redemption that would later manifest in Christ. Likewise, in your long night, he is preparing outcomes that reach beyond your generation. Your obedience in delay plants seeds your descendants will harvest. You must therefore reinterpret time. Stop seeing it as an enemy. See it as an ally molded by God's hand. Time in his presence becomes a servant of purpose. Each delay lengthens your route before height. Trees that grow quickly fall quickly. Those that grow slowly withstand centuries. Divine timing builds longevity. When breakthrough comes, it will not fade like emotion. It will endure like covenant. Sometimes God extends delay to train your discernment. Quick answers can blind you to deception. Waiting sharpens your spiritual senses. You begin to distinguish his voice from noise, his peace from pleasure, his calling from convenience. In the stillness of delay, you learn what truly matters. You stop chasing results and start seeking relationship. That shift is the essence of Psalm 44, the move from nostalgia for miracles to hunger for presence. The psalmists wanted God to act. God wanted them to know him. If you could see the heavenly choreography taking place while you wait, you would not complain. You would worship. Angels are repositioned, resources redirected, hearts softened, opportunities refined. Delay is not emptiness. It is motion disguised as stillness. God's steps are quiet because he walks in dimensions beyond sound. By the time you perceive movement, the miracle has already been prepared. And yet the valley of delay is painful. Faith does not remove ache. Even Jesus felt it when he waited 2 extra days before going to Lazarus. The sisters thought delay meant death, but Jesus called it glory. In that silence, decay increased so that resurrection would be undeniable. Sometimes God allows things to worsen so that the magnitude of restoration cannot be questioned. You think the situation is rotting, but he is preparing resurrection so vast that even skeptics will bow. Do not let the valley convince you that darkness prevails. Remember the title of this psalmic journey, God goes before you, and every dark power behind you is broken now. That includes the dark whisper that tells you nothing is changing. Silence is not the sound of defeat. It is the pause between commands. Heaven is recalibrating. The same voice that said, "Let there be light," still governs your delay. In your waiting, gratitude is warfare. When you thank God before the outcome, you declare that he has already gone ahead. Gratitude transforms the valley into sanctuary. The Israelites sang after crossing the Red Sea. Mature faith sings while the sea is still closed. Gratitude becomes the bridge between promise and fulfillment. Each thank you uttered in uncertainty shortens the distance to manifestation. Do not despise small progress during delay. The manna that sustained Israel daily was not permanent provision, but faith rehearsal. Likewise, the small mercies you receive now, unexpected peace, a friend's encouragement, a glimpse of hope, are divine breadcrumbs leading you forward. They are proof that the God who began the journey is still guiding it. Eventually, divine timing completes its circle. The same God who delays also accelerates. When the appointed hour arrives, what once took years happens in moments. This is the paradox of divine leadership. He walks slowly through preparation, but swiftly through fulfillment. The God who seems late always arrives precisely when glory will be maximum. Suddenly, the valley becomes a memory, and you realize the delay was the disguise of deliverance. At that moment, you will understand why Psalm 44 shifts from lament to hope. The people cry for redemption, and though they do not yet see it, the cry itself triggers movement. Your prayer in the valley releases sound waves that echo in eternity. Heaven answers not according to the volume of your cry, but the alignment of your heart. When faith and timing meet, manifestation bursts forth like dawn. Then, as you step out of delay into destiny, you will see what God has been doing. The dark powers that chased you will appear behind you, broken and irrelevant. The pain that once tormented you will become story. The valley that humbled you will become platform. You will testify not merely of what you gained, but of who you became. For in delay you did not just wait, you transformed. Now you know that when God goes before you, even time becomes servant. You need not fight the clock, for it ticks in your favor. You need not fear stagnation, for stillness hides strategy. You need not doubt your path, for divine footsteps mark every second ahead. Delay was never a detour. It was the proving ground of trust. So lift your eyes from the shadow of waiting and behold the horizon of fulfillment. The God who began your journey has already written its end. What you call waiting, heaven calls preparation. What you call frustration, heaven calls formation. And what you call silence, heaven calls symphony. God's timing is perfect because it carries both mercy and justice. He will not let you enter your promise unprepared, nor will he let your enemies rejoice unchecked. Every second of delay balances these two purposes. When the appointed hour arrives, both you and your circumstances will be ready. That readiness is the hidden mercy within postponement. Therefore take heart, the valley is not eternal. Every dark power that tried to delay you has already been dismantled by the one walking before you. When he speaks, "Go!" no force in hell or earth can restrain your forward motion. The same God who held you still will propel you swiftly. Your tears were not wasted. They watered the soil of coming glory. In this sacred interval, worship. Thank him for leading in silence, for protecting through postponement, for maturing you through mystery. One day soon, you will realize that the waiting was the miracle. And you will echo the psalmist's final cry, not as plea, but as praise. Redeem us for thy mercy's sake. For the mercy that delays is the mercy that delivers. The God who went before you through time has already broken every dark power behind you. You are not late. You are aligned. You are not forgotten. You are fortified. You are not stuck. You are stationed in divine strategy. Walk on. Keep believing, keep trusting the rhythm of the one who holds eternity. If this message strengthens your heart and helps you discern God's movement in your own valley, remember to subscribe to the channel so you can continue receiving revelations that prepare you for victory, deepen your faith, and remind you that every dark power behind you is already broken by the God who goes before you. When God fights for you in the shadows, there are wars you will never see, victories you will never know, and rescues you will never remember because they happened before danger ever reached you. This is the quiet reality of walking with a God who goes before you. The human heart only measures miracles by what it perceives, but heaven measures them by what never happened because God intervened first. Psalm 44 is a window into that unseen dimension where divine power meets hidden conflict. The people cry, "Thou art my king, O God, command deliverances for Jacob." They are invoking a timeless truth. that every deliverance begins as a command from heaven before it becomes an event on earth. When God fights for you, the command is issued long before the enemy even appears. There are moments when you feel as though life is collapsing from every direction. But if you could see what has already been prevented, your heart would bow in awe. For every visible battle you face, there are hundreds of invisible ones already won. When the psalmist says, "Through thee we push down our enemies," it is not a declaration of equal partnership. It is acknowledgement of absolute dependence. We do not win beside God, we win within Him. The human hand swings the sword, but it is His breath that gives it strength. When God fights for you, His warfare does not always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like confusion in the enemy's camp. Sometimes it looks like exhaustion in those who plot against you. Sometimes it looks like divine delay that makes them quit before they strike. The power of God is not always expressed through fire and earthquake. Often it is seen in the way the schemes of darkness simply dissolve. That meeting that never happened, that betrayal that lost its momentum, that attack that felt planned but never arrived, all were acts of divine interruption. You may not have noticed, but the commander of heaven's armies had already gone before you and dismantled what was rising behind. The shadows are not empty. They are the places where God does His finest work. While you are asleep, He is moving through the corridors of time, rearranging events, redirecting paths, and silencing voices. Scripture declares that He that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. This means that every moment you feel most vulnerable, God is at His most vigilant. He does not only defend, He preempts. There is a kind of victory that does not require your awareness, only your surrender. When Israel marched under Moses, they had to learn this lesson painfully. There were battles they were not called to fight, because God had already commanded the earth to fight for them. The sea obeyed His word, the plagues bowed to His voice, and the pillar of fire stood between them and Pharaoh. Even before they cried for help, God had positioned Himself as their barrier. That is the nature of His love. It anticipates danger. You and I serve a God who does not wait for the alarm to sound before He acts. He lives outside of time, seeing the attack before the enemy conceives it, and destroys it before it is born. The greatest evidence that God is fighting for you is not the absence of battle, but the inability of battle to destroy you. You have walked through storms that should have ended your faith, through losses that should have paralyzed your purpose, and yet you stand. Your survival is not luck. It is divine proof that God's presence preceded the pain. Every wound that healed faster than expected, every anxiety that lifted when you prayed, every moment you found unexpected peace in chaos, these are fingerprints of a God waging unseen war for your soul. But this truth carries a call. You must learn to trust divine silence. When God fights in the shadows, He rarely announces His strategies. He hides His hand so that your faith may grow. Psalm 44's cry, "Awake, why sleepest thou, O Lord?" captures this tension. The people mistake silence for slumber. But silence is not absence, it is strategy. God hides to protect you from trying to manage what He alone can fight. If you saw the warfare around you, your heart would crumble under the weight of it. That is why He conceals His movements, not to deprive you of comfort, but to preserve your sanity. There are seasons when you feel completely surrounded by confusion, relationships breaking, finances collapsing, health weakening, peace disappearing. It is tempting to believe that God has withdrawn, that your prayers have lost power. But often those are the moments when He is most active, dismantling attacks in realms you cannot see. The greatest wars are fought in stillness. The night you could not sleep and decided to pray for no apparent reason. It was not random. Something was moving against you, and the Spirit stirred you to intercede. That impulse was not emotional. It was divine coordination. God was fighting through your obedience. When you pray, your words travel beyond this dimension. They enter the command center of heaven, where angels receive orders. The battle you think you are fighting alone is actually the echo of celestial motion. Every sigh, every groan, every whispered "help me" is amplified before the throne of grace. When the psalmist writes, "Command deliverances," he is acknowledging that deliverance begins with a word from God's mouth. The moment that command is spoken, the outcome is settled. It may take time for earth to manifest what heaven has decreed, but delay does not alter decree. In spiritual warfare, timing is tactical. God releases certain victories in seasons when they will have maximum impact. He does not waste triumphs on immature faith. That is why some prayers are answered later, because premature victory could have become premature pride. When God goes before you, He arranges both victory and humility. The combination ensures you remain usable after deliverance. Many lose their intimacy with God after He delivers them because they mistake relief for righteousness. But when you realize that the victory was not yours, you stay at His feet even after the battle ends. Psalm 44 reminds us that Israel's fathers triumphed not by their sword, but by God's right hand. That right hand is not a metaphor for strength alone. It represents authority. The same hand that shaped creation still moves in your life. When God's hand goes before you, it leaves no trace of your enemies behind. The dark powers that once monitored your steps are blinded by divine light. The curses once spoken against your name are erased from their source. The spiritual opposition that tried to follow you from one season to another loses track of you because you are hidden in His presence. When God fights for you, you become untraceable in the spirit. There is something sacred about being hidden. The modern world hates obscurity, but heaven uses it. When God hides you, He is fighting for you. Hidden seasons are protective sanctuaries where He redefines your strength and renews your mind. It may feel like isolation, but it is insulation. The world cannot see what He is forming in you because the cocoon must remain closed until transformation is complete. And while you wait, He is breaking every spiritual chain that linked your destiny to past pain. Every dark power has a lifespan. It cannot survive divine exposure. God does not need to wrestle with darkness. He simply shines. When His light goes before you, demonic strategies disintegrate like mist before dawn. That is why prayer, worship, and obedience are not religious duties. They are acts of alignment with light. Each moment you choose purity over compromise, you magnify the brightness that breaks darkness. The warfare that surrounds you is not merely external. It is the daily choice between the light of obedience and the shadow of rebellion. But even when you falter, grace continues fighting for you. Grace is not permission. It is protection. It keeps the covenant active when you stumble, ensuring that the enemy never regains legal ground. Sometimes God fights for you by removing people you loved. It feels cruel at first, like abandonment wrapped in confusion, but He knows when companionship becomes contamination. There are connections that carry invisible warfare, souls whose presence reopens wounds you thought healed. To protect you, He intervenes by distance. You cry over what was lost, unaware that loss itself was rescue. The friendship that failed was a fortress being dismantled by mercy. God goes before you not only through opportunities, but through endings. Every closed door is a divine sword, sealing what could have destroyed you later. And yet there is pain in being protected. The flesh interprets loss as punishment, but the spirit must learn to interpret it as pruning. Every battle you survive refines your discernment. You begin to recognize divine fingerprints in what once felt like disappointment. When you look back, you will realize that the breakup, the failure, the rejection, and the delay were all battle strategies. You were not losing, you were being positioned. God was moving you away from places where the enemy had set traps disguised as blessings. The warfare of God's love is fierce. He fights not merely for your comfort, but for your calling. He knows that destiny requires purification, so He removes what weakens conviction. Sometimes he withholds victory until your motives align with his. If he delivered you too soon, you would attribute glory to your effort, so he lets the fire burn longer, not to harm, but to harden your faith. True strength is forged in prolonged trust. The enemy cannot defeat a believer who has learned to rest, even when the outcome is uncertain. To walk with God is to embrace the mystery of divine warfare, the understanding that his victories rarely follow logic. He lets giants mock before he slays them. He lets storms rage before he speaks peace. He allows you to feel forgotten so that you will discover faith that needs no reassurance. Every shadow you walk through is territory he already conquered. You may tremble, but you are walking on holy ground, the ground of battles already won. Remember how the psalm begins. We have heard with our ears, O God. Our fathers have told us, memory is a weapon. When current battles blind your hope, recall past deliverances. The same God who went before your ancestors still leads today. He has never lost a war. Every generation that trusted him saw darkness defeated. You are part of that same lineage of victory. Psalm 44 is not simply history, it is prophecy over every believer who reads it in faith. And yet, divine warfare also calls for humility. God's victories are not trophies for pride, but invitations to worship. The people in the psalm declare, "In God we boast all the day long and praise thy name forever." That is the correct response to unseen warfare, to live in continuous gratitude. Gratitude keeps you connected to the source. When you boast in him, you remain immune to the corruption of pride. Praise becomes both shield and celebration. It confuses the enemy because it announces joy in the midst of struggle. When you praise during battle, you declare that outcome no longer dictates worship. When God goes before you, he changes the definition of warfare. You stop fighting for peace and start fighting from peace. Your posture shifts from panic to authority. You begin to see storms as signals that victory is near. The pressure that once crushed you now becomes proof that heaven is close. You realize that the attacks intensified not because you are weak, but because your calling threatens darkness. That revelation transforms your pain into purpose. You no longer ask, "Why is this happening to me?" Instead, you whisper, "What is heaven preparing through this?" That shift in perspective is the ultimate victory of faith. The enemy cannot destroy a heart that trusts God's intention even in the dark. That is what it means to be led by a God who goes before you. He does not promise ease, he promises outcome. Every bruise becomes evidence of survival. Every scar becomes prophecy of restoration. The warfare you endure now will one day serve as proof to others that God still fights for those who trust him. When all is said and done, you will discover that your greatest deliverances happened in silence. You will stand on the other side of the storm and realize that the very night you feared was the night God built your endurance. You will remember how you almost quit, but something unseen held you upright. That something was someone, your defender, your shepherd, your unseen warrior who goes before you and breaks what hunts you, the God who never fails. So lift your head again. The shadows are not your enemy. They are the stage where God displays invisible victories. The darkness you fear is about to reveal divine light. Even now, he is fighting for you, breaking alliances formed against you and rewriting stories meant to shame you. The battle you sense but cannot define is already finished. You do not need to fight for visibility. You need only to stay faithful in invisibility. The God who began the war will finish it without requiring your panic. Psalm 44 teaches us that remembrance must lead to reliance. The same God who parted seas will part confusion. The same God who struck down giants will silence gossip. The same God who preserved Israel in exile will preserve you in uncertainty. His strategies may differ, but his nature never changes. He still fights for his own. Therefore rest in this truth, even in the darkest seasons. You are not surrounded by enemies. You are surrounded by evidence of divine warfare. God is not absent in the shadows. He is active. The silence you hear is the sound of him working deeply, destroying what would have destroyed you. The fear you feel is the last breath of defeated powers gasping as light closes in. The tears you shed are the final drops of an old season washing away. The dawn of victory is nearer than you think. Do not give up now. The same hand that guided you into this valley will guide you out. The same voice that spoke peace in storms past will speak again. The same presence that went before David, before Esther, before Moses, before Paul. That same presence walks ahead of you now. Every dark power behind you has already been stripped of strength. Walk forward in holy confidence, for heaven has already declared your name victorious. When you finally see how completely God has fought for you, worship will no longer be a command. It will be your reflex. You will no longer need faith to believe he goes before you. You will have memory. Until then, keep walking by trust. The shadows are not permanent. The light is already moving. If this message strengthens your faith and helps you see how God fights for you, even when you cannot see it, remember to subscribe to the channel so you can continue walking in revelation, grow in strength, and witness how every dark power behind you is broken now because God goes before you. The triumph of faith. When God turns defeat into testimony, every story written by God has a moment when defeat seems final. Psalm 44 dwells in that space between collapse and resurrection, where faith must decide whether to die with sight or live by trust. The people lament, "Thou hast cast off, and put us to shame, and goest not forth with our armies." They describe humiliation, confusion, loss of favor. Yet within that cry there is a pulse of belief that refuses to die. Faith does not deny pain. It endures it while waiting for redemption. When God goes before you, even defeat is a disguised detour toward testimony. The same valley that mocked you becomes the altar that crowns you. The psalmist's anguish is not rebellion, it is intimacy. Only those who truly know God dare to question him with such honesty. "Why hidest thou thy face?" he asks, echoing the heart of every believer who has prayed without answer. But hidden within that question is the seed of victory, a refusal to accept distance as destiny. When the soul still cries to God, it means faith survives. The enemy's goal is not simply to hurt you, it is to silence you. Every whispered prayer in exhaustion is a declaration that hell has failed. Defeat is never final when God walks before you. He specializes in writing victory into chapters labeled loss. Israel's story proves it. They were enslaved, yet became deliverers, exiled, yet returned stronger, scattered, yet preserved. Every collapse carried hidden continuity because God never left the script. You may think your life has fallen apart, but to heaven it has merely shifted scenes. The same author who began the story of your calling has already written its restoration. When you walk with God, the appearance of defeat often signals that victory has entered a higher dimension. What looks like loss on earth may be triumph in heaven. Jesus on the cross appeared conquered, yet that cross became the throne of redemption. Likewise, some of your lowest moments are sacred intersections where unseen glory begins. God's presence often descends most powerfully into ashes. The altar must hold something burnt before it reveals fire. Faith becomes triumphant not because circumstances change instantly, but because it changes the believer first. Psalm 44 begins with remembrance and ends with request, but the heart that began with history ends with hope. The shift is subtle but divine, from "our fathers told us" to "redeem us for thy mercy's sake." Memory evolves into expectancy. That is the true triumph of faith, to believe again after disappointment. When God goes before you, he converts shame into sanctification. The places that embarrassed you become evidence of endurance. The prayers that seemed unanswered become parables of persistence. You realize that faith is not proven in victories but in valleys. Anyone can praise when the sea parts. Only the chosen can praise when the sea is silent. That kind of praise terrifies darkness because it reveals unbreakable allegiance. The moment you choose to worship without evidence, every dark power loses jurisdiction. There is a mysterious reversal that occurs when faith refuses to surrender. The same defeat the enemy intended for your destruction becomes the training ground for authority. The pain you endure becomes language others will understand when they suffer. Your tears become the ink with which God writes comfort for future generations. This is why the psalmist's lament was preserved. It became medicine for centuries of hearts. What you are living now may feel meaningless, but it will feed someone's faith later. Nothing endured in God's presence is wasted. In spiritual reality, no wound healed in faith remains a scar of shame. It becomes a mark of belonging. Paul carried his sufferings as proof of Christ's ownership. Each trial you survive while remaining faithful becomes a seal of divine ownership. You stop asking, "Why me?" and start realizing, "Because he trusts me." God allows certain battles, not because you are weak, but because you are trustworthy with testimony. The triumph of faith begins when you stop measuring God's love by your comfort. Psalm 44's people thought his favor meant victory. God was teaching them that favor means formation. The presence that went before them into war was now leading them into surrender. Sometimes God's greatest battles are fought not against external enemies, but against the inner idols of self-reliance. He leads us into defeats that dismantle pride, so that the next victory belongs wholly to him. When you walk with a God who goes before you, even the losses he allows are strategic. The delay you cursed was the bridge to your calling. The rejection that humiliated you was the door to authenticity. The silence that tormented you was the school of discernment. Faith triumphs not by avoiding these valleys, but by interpreting them correctly. Every event that broke your confidence in yourself strengthened your dependence on him. That is victory in its purest form. The Psalms' plea, "Arise for our help," echoes through centuries as the universal cry of faith under fire. Yet each generation that echoes it discovers the same truth. God was never asleep. He was waiting for surrender. When human effort collapses, divine grace accelerates. When your strategies fail, his sovereignty shines. The Israelites had to exhaust their strength before they rediscovered his. We, too, must reach the end of our cleverness before we taste the simplicity of trust. Faith's triumph is therefore not loud. It is quiet resilience. It is the whispered, "Still here" after storms. It is the ability to get up one more time without bitterness. It is endurance baptized in hope. When God goes before you, he carries victory in layers, some seen, some delayed, some eternal. The moment you choose to continue walking, even without answers, you align yourself with divine motion. Heaven rewards motion more than perfection. Defeat feels devastating because it challenges identity. You believed you were chosen, called, protected, and then pain struck. The mind screams contradiction, but remember, being chosen never exempted anyone from suffering. It guaranteed purpose in it. Israel's defeats refine them for Messiah. Your trials refine you for ministry. The shadow proves there is still light to cast it. When you stand amid ruin and still call him faithful, the spiritual realm shifts. Heaven recognizes maturity. Demons recognize futility. You have crossed from conditional belief to covenantal trust. Conditional belief says, "I trust you if you bless me." Covenant trust says, "I trust you because you are good, regardless of outcome." The second kind of faith cannot be manipulated. It terrifies hell because it cannot be bribed by comfort or broken by pain. Faith triumphant also transforms perception of time. You stop panicking about how long deliverance takes because you realize the one who goes before you has already finished it in eternity. The process is simply your earthly participation in completed victory. You learn to walk through hours with eternal eyesight. The more you dwell in that awareness, the more peace replaces impatience. The enemy thrives on the illusion of permanence. He whispers, "This will never end." But faith, anchored in God's leadership, knows that everything earthly is temporary, even suffering. Psalm 44's final cry, "Redeem us for thy mercy's sake," is the ultimate confession that mercy outruns misery. Every shadow has an expiration date written in God's handwriting. What looks endless is already ending in His sight. When you emerge from the valley, you realize that God never intended to prove the strength of your faith. He wanted to prove the certainty of His character. You discover that He was never testing your worth. He was teaching your trust. And suddenly the verse, "For thy mercy's sake," becomes your anthem. You understand that mercy, not merit, sustains every step. You no longer worship to earn, you worship because you are preserved. In that revelation, the soul finds rest. The striving stops. You cease fighting for validation because you see that God Himself has validated you by choosing to walk ahead. His favor is no longer measured by visible blessings, but by invisible nearness. You realize that presence is better than prosperity, intimacy richer than influence, obedience sweeter than outcome. That is the summit of Psalm 44, the awakening that even if the world misreads your story, heaven already calls it victory. The triumph of faith is not that you avoid darkness, but that you walk through it illuminated by unseen fire. Every believer becomes, in some measure, a living psalm, a testimony sung through tears. Your enemies may still whisper, your circumstances may still resist, but something within you has shifted forever. You now know that God's presence precedes and surrounds. You cannot be overtaken because you are overcovered. And as you walk forward, a new humility rises. You begin to see others through mercy's lens. Those still trapped in defeat no longer seem weak. They look like reflections of your own process. You learn to speak gently, to restore others instead of judging them. True victory produces compassion, not comparison. You become a vessel of comfort because you remember what it felt like to be comfortless. That is how God multiplies triumph. He turns one person's breakthrough into another's beginning. When the psalmist wrote, "In God we boast all the day long," he was not speaking of arrogance but of gratitude. Boasting in God means living constantly aware that survival itself is supernatural. Every breath becomes proof of ongoing warfare won by unseen grace. You do not need new miracles to believe. You are the miracle. Eventually, the journey brings you full circle. The same God who went before you into battle now walks beside you in peace. The same faith that once cried for deliverance now sings of dependence. You no longer need to demand signs because trust itself has become sight. The path that terrified you has become testimony. The enemies that haunted you have become history. At that point, worship ceases to be reaction. It becomes identity. You realize that you were never created merely to survive, but to display His faithfulness. Every believer who learns this truth becomes a living echo of Psalm 44's conclusion. Mercy has the final word. Not the battle, not the wound, not the waiting, mercy. So, if you find yourself today standing in ashes, do not despise them. Ashes are evidence that fire has passed but not consumed you. They mark the place where God's presence burned away what could not follow into your future. From those ashes glory rises. What you thought was the end is the unveiling of new beginning. God is already ahead of you, building paths where none existed. You may not see the outcome, but you will feel His direction. Every step will start carrying quiet assurance. People around you may not understand it, but peace will no longer depend on explanation. You will wake each day aware that someone larger, wiser, stronger has already stepped into the hours ahead. You will move with the calm of one protected by prophecy. And when life tries again to test you, you will no longer panic. You will whisper the ancient assurance, "My God goes before me, therefore every dark power behind me is broken." That sentence will become your shield in every future battle. It will remind you that hell operates in reaction while heaven operates in initiation. You are not reacting, you are following divine momentum. One day, when you stand before him and look back over your journey, you will see how perfectly each moment fit together. The delays, the losses, the cries, the waiting, they were brushstrokes in a masterpiece of mercy. You will see that nothing was random, and everything worked toward revelation. God went before you not just in battle, but in every breath. The dark powers behind you will exist only as fading memories in the light of eternal victory. Until that day, walk with unhurried faith. Praise when you do not understand. Believe when nothing moves. Rest in the knowledge that your defender never sleeps. He has already commanded deliverance in places you have not yet entered. Your story will end, as every story of those who trust him ends, in triumph written by hands that cannot fail. If this message has spoken to your heart and strengthened your faith in God's unfailing leadership, remember to subscribe to the channel so you can continue receiving revelations that deepen your walk, awaken your spirit, and remind you always that God goes before you, and every dark power behind you is broken now.